But actually, so Leon, they may have seen Leon like a little tiny street. It's called Leon Street.
Oh, it goes right there.
It looked like we had a tiny little playground with all stones and everything, but that was, Leon Street was on the side. So here's
We were in person.
yeah, then we'll go up to Garden. Turns out I went to the school where
Yes. I could have told you that years ago.
it's a small world.
Hello, everybody. We might have a few stragglers coming in. We'll just have them slide in. I know. Can you believe we're here?
No, I cannot.
What a journey.
Yeah.
So welcome to Center of Grace. Just little house rules. There's 3 bathrooms, and they're all on the right side of the hallway. So if you go around the corner, there's another half bath there. Feel free to wander around, check the place out, make yourself at home. Renee has some nice food and beverages out here, and around the corner is water. There's a Berkey filter that filters water. And in the kitchen, feel free to just grab a mug. There's tea, there's hot water in the pot there, so make yourself at home. And you all know this gorgeous being, the other Renee. I'm actually the other Renee. This is the Renee. So, take the floor.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Renee, for giving me a venue to do this talk during COVID, because it's definitely been a challenge to try and find a venue during, this weird pandemic situation. So I'm gonna sit down. I did take some notes, so I'm gonna, lean on them heavily at the beginning, just so I can kind of focus myself. But I do want to thank everybody for coming today. I mean, most of you here I know very well. Some of you I've lived with and lived with and lived with, and some of you are my oldest friends and whatever. So I'm just and oldest teachers. So I'm so glad that you're here, and new people as well. So thank you for coming on a Sunday afternoon.
And some people birthed you.
And some people, I said, some people birthed me, lived with, they put me in the bed and all that stuff. So thank you. So I guess when I was thinking about how I wanted to start this talk, what I was thinking is that I wanted to share a little bit about this class of drugs before I get into my story. I want to share a little bit about the class of drugs that caused me so much trouble and are causing so much trouble for so many other people. And that class are benzodiazepines, and that's the umbrella term, but those are drugs like, so I'm going to use the 2 names for first, and I'll just use brand names. So it's Ativan, which is lorazepam, Valium, which is diazepam, Klonopin, which is clonazepam, Xanax, which is alprazolam. Basically anything that ends in lam or pam, you just don't want to do those things. And I thought that maybe some of you might know somebody who is using these medications, or might even be taking these medications, yourselves. So I just want to share a little bit about the history. So truth be told, benzodiazepines were never supposed to be administered for more than 4 weeks. But in 2021, this is the newest statistic, is that they're the pharmaceutical industry's top-selling family of prescription drugs, with an estimated 92 million benzodiazepine prescriptions dispensed in the United States out of retail and mail-order pharmacies, and that is as of last month. That's a brand new statistic. This did not happen overnight. And the way benzos came is, I think, sort of interesting. So nearly a century ago, there were these German chemists, and they developed a class of sedatives known as barbiturates. And they were the first synthetic tranquilizers. They were marketed under tons of different names, but they came to a lot of popularity in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when people were like jumping out of buildings and just generally like very anxious, and so people started to prescribe these quote unquote nerve pills. And you know, these nerve pills were very effective. They helped people to sleep, they helped take the edge off, but by 1941, Americans were consuming more than 1 billion barbiturates per year. And the problem with this is that they were sold over the counter, so this was without a prescription, and that doctors and pharmacists were assuring customers that the pills were harmless, that they were safe, effective, and non-addictive. And this was based on the promotional materials that they were receiving from the drug companies. So while the drugs did what they were supposed to do and they helped people calm down and relax, they were also causing some other issues behind the scenes, namely tolerance, dependence, and a very high risk of overdose. So that's the barbiturates. In the 1950s, Congress passed a law saying that you could no longer have over-the-counter barbiturates, that people were really having trouble with these overdoses and bad side effects. And so, they produced a law that said physicians had to have approval. You had to have a doctor sign off on something to get these medications. And the pharmaceutical companies, seeing that there was like this vast opportunity to try and help people who like needed more nerve pills, they went on to try to develop new drugs to meet the demand. So in 1955, there was this guy, I don't like this guy, Leo Sternbach, but in 1955, there was a Swiss chemist named Leo Sternbach. He was at Hoffmann-La Roche, and he synthesized the first benzodiazepine. And the company called it Librium, and they set it out on market in 1960. And this new drug worked on the same neurotransmitters as the barbiturates. It depressed the central nervous system and helped to produce this like sense of calm that everybody is always chasing. The drug companies once again said they are safe, they are effective, they are non-addictive, you will not have a problem. But they also said it was a completely safe breakthrough. Like this is this is a new class of drugs, you don't have to worry, much safer. So Hoffmann-La Roche then, shortly thereafter, after the Librium, they invented the soon-to-be famous Valium, which the Rolling Stones talked about as Mother's Little Helper and all that kind of stuff. And sales of this drug went through the roof. And both drugs, the Librium and the Valium, were marketed as being different than benzodiazepines, like I said, safer, faster acting, and not addictive. But once again, this was a lie by the drug companies. And soon after, people started to report problems with withdrawal, like they couldn't get off of these medications, they were having a lot of difficulties. So La Roche got busy again and started marketing a different drug. This time it was clonazepam or Klonopin in 1977, and Wyeth Pharmaceuticals also released Ativan, I think it was like 2 years later. They stopped using the word tranquilizer, and they started to use the word anxiolytic, which is just fancy new marketing for the same problem. They didn't do anything different, they just started calling it anxiolytic. And they suggested that benzos were an entirely new class of drugs. The lower doses on these drugs was super duper tricky because it masked their potency. So for example, 1 milligram of clonazepam equals 20 milligrams of Valium. So it sounds really tricky, right? Like, oh, I'm just taking 1 milligram. Like, how strong is that? But it's very strong, especially when you think about if you go to get like a dental procedure, typically a dentist will give you 5 milligrams of Valium for like 1 day, for your procedure, but you wouldn't want to be taking that every single day. So it's also that conversion is true also for Xanax. 1 milligram of Xanax is 20 milligrams of Valium. Okay. In the late 80s, the first antidepressant, Prozac, was born and touted as a wonder drug. And suddenly, something kind of shifted in the psychiatric community, which was when people were upset or going through a difficult time in their lives, like bereavement or divorce or like an illness or an injury, instead of or any kind of trauma, really. Instead of like talking to your friends or talking to a family member or to like a religious leader, people were encouraged to seek medical intervention or medical help from a medical professional. And so at the same time in the 80s, which I think is so interesting, pharmaceutical companies started to have much more of influence in medical school students in their education. So they started creating the books that were being put out. They were sort of having a hand in how people were suddenly treating issues. So if you had a somatic, a physical problem, now there was a drug that you could take to deal with that physical problem in the 80s. Prior to that, you know, it's like really everyone was sort of taking aspirin or Advil or, you know, those kinds of things. But all of a sudden it was like, well, there doesn't have to be suffering anymore. This is like, you just don't need to suffer, and suffering is, you know, we should never have to suffer, especially any emotional pain. And so patients were, so young and impressionable medical students were taught that patients who were presenting with anxiety or depression had a chemical imbalance. And I can tell you that is the very first thing that my doctor told me, that I had a brain imbalance, I had a chemical imbalance in my brain, and that he had a drug that was going to help that. That is a really scary sounding thing when someone's telling you that you have a problem with your brain. And, you know, so let's just understand that that was happening in the 80s. The pharmaceutical representatives impressed upon doctors that there was no need to suffer, and that there was definitely a pill for every ill, and it was just a matter of finding the right cocktail of drugs, right? You have to find the right, you know, try different things. And truth be told, at first, the drugs seemed to work. I mean, this is the deal with the devil. At first, they really work. If you can't sleep, you will sleep. If you're feeling sad, you feel less sad. If you're feeling anxious, the anxiety will drip away. And so, you know, they work. And patients reported feeling better at follow-up appointments. They were sleeping, they were reporting feeling less anxious, all these things. However, doctors continued to aggressively prescribe benzos during the 80s, and at the same time, other industrialized countries like the UK, Denmark, other places, they began to strictly regulate these drugs and say they're only used for emergent use, emergent use, and they should not be used for non-emergency use. And there was a huge class action suit in the United Kingdom where 14,000 people filed a class action suit, and they sued the makers of benzodiazepines for knowingly prescribing these drugs and withholding information about their harm. Okay, but even though this was happening, you know, just across the pond, and the US doctors and FDA knew about this, they did not think to investigate this in the United States, which is just flooring. It just floors you a little bit. Like somehow we're made of different stuff here. But so in 1990, finally, the APA, or the American Psychiatric Association, launched a task force to investigate what they were saying and what they were seeing now in the United States. And by 2000, this is a decade later of investigating, 10 years later, it was reported that up to 80% of people taking benzodiazepines could experience withdrawal upon cessation, and that 1 in 6 could suffer from an extreme form of protracted withdrawal that could last for over 2 years. This was in 2000, they knew this. So just as a little footnote, I didn't start taking this medication until 2004. How much do I wish I had that information in 2000, right? So, I mean, it would have, anyway. So somehow these warnings were ignored, and by 2008, 1 in 20 Americans were filling out a prescription for at least one benzodiazepine, sometimes more. Sometimes people were taking Ativan and Klonopin. Sometimes they were taking Valium and Xanax. Also around this time, the United States consumers became, we were introduced to the Z drugs, right? Like Ambien, other drugs, and we were told that these are safe, that these are okay to take for bedtime insomnia. But the reality is they hit the same exact neurotransmitters. They're not benzos, but the mechanism is so similar. And I'm sure many of you probably heard like jokes a little bit about like people sleepwalking or driving or night binging on food, and they just don't remember it in the morning. It's because what these drugs do is they have a slight amnesiatic effect. And so you don't remember, people don't remember. Another really powerful benzo is, I can't remember the actual medical thing, it's like flutramazole or something, but it's roofies. Roofies are a benzodiazepine. So the reason why roofies work is that, these are like the date rape drugs, where people go and they're drugged and then they wake up and can't remember anything, and it's the same thing. They have this slight amnesiac effect, which makes them so dangerous. So even though the British Medical Association published this major report highlighting the dangers and dependence of and withdrawal, in 2015, the FDA continued to turn a blind eye. So we're talking, this is 15 years later after that first report. Finally, 2016, the FDA issues a black box warning saying that you should not combine benzodiazepines with opiates. Well, that was something, right? There's a black box warning saying like you shouldn't combine benzos with opiates, because now we have the oxycodone issue and all that stuff with the Sackler family and the Purdue drugs and all that stuff. But that is only like a small piece of it, because it's not really just about combining these drugs. Benzos are horrible on their own, and OxyContin is horrible on its own. But that was their 2016 black box warning. Over the next few years, more than 300,000 complaints went into the FDA's adverse event reporting system, where people were complaining about horrible symptoms associated with benzos. And in 2020, finally, during the COVID quarantine, the FDA strengthened their black box warning, and it acknowledged, I'm gonna just quote this is in big quotes, patients can become physically dependent after taking benzos for as little as several days. They acknowledge that stopping the drugs abruptly or reducing the dosage too quickly can cause severe withdrawal reactions, including seizures, which can be life-threatening. And they also stated that severe side effects could last for weeks to years. That is within the last year, okay? I've been out of this mess since 2017. I just wish we could go all the way back to 1950s and make things right. But so today the number of prescriptions continues to rise, as does the number of people in the benzo injured community. And I just wanted to start there because I always feel like people might not know about benzodiazepines. And so now that you know a little bit about the history of those drugs, I want to just explain how my story fits into all of this. All of us have a little trauma in our lives, right? Everybody has trauma. And so I'm like, I want to get like t-shirts that say like normalized trauma or something, because these are things that we need to be talking about, not being ashamed of or feeling embarrassed about. But so in my life, I've had plenty of trauma, and there's a lot to say about that. There were things that I experienced in school, not with Mr. McKeever. I had some things in school. I definitely had like plenty of sexual harassment in my life, and I'm sure if I asked everyone here, how many of you experienced sexual harassment, I'm gonna guess every single woman in here is gonna raise up her hand, maybe even some of the dudes. So and then there were other things that happened in my life privately, but I would say there were two major incidents in my life that really were very traumatic for me. And one was the rape that I experienced just prior to going to college. So 2 weeks before I went to college, I was raped by someone that I knew and trusted. There was no term for date rape in 1985. Rape, as my dad used to cut out lots of articles for me when we would go out with my girlfriends, he would cut out an article saying like, avoid thorn and thicket, because like women are being raped there. In my mind, rape was something that happened with a stranger with a weapon. It wasn't that, that was what rape was. And I never could have even ever had a framework for what had happened with this person that I knew and trusted. I just knew it was a huge betrayal. So that was right before I went to college. And so all these things that happen to us in our lives are cumulative. And the metaphor that I kind of use these days is, if you think about how someone gets skin cancer, right? Like, you don't get skin cancer the first time you go outside and get a sunburn. Like, it just doesn't happen like that. But it's years of cumulative exposure, and then pretend we all get like a little cup of how much sun we can have on our skin, whatever. And at a certain point, it's like, bloop, okay, your cup runneth over, and then you get your first little, lesions or whatever. I feel like the same is sort of true with trauma. Everyone has a different size cup. Maybe some people have that big gulp size of trauma and they can handle more. And maybe some people have like a shot glass size, and you don't really know how big your trauma is, how much your holder is. But for me, or for all of us, it's like, it fills up, and then at a certain point it bubbles over, and that's when you start to experience some symptomology. So for me, I appeared to be fine for years, and I think that this is why this is such a surprise to many people. I went to high school, I went to college, I went to graduate school, I had a great job as an English teacher, thanks Mr. McKeever. I got married, I bought a house, we had cars, we had a nice house, we had a second house, and we took really nice vacations. So from the outside looking in, it looked like all was well in the world. And to be fair, to be honest, I knew that these events in my life had impacted me. I mean, I knew the whole way that these things were like pretty heavy things. You know, I would share with people what had happened to me, and I could see people like literally, viscerally, visually recoil when I would say, you know, some things that had happened in my life. And you learn to just kind of be quiet about them when people are responding that way. So I knew that these events had impacted me, but I just stuffed them down, and the big story in my life, and in probably many other people's lives, is like, just put on your big girl panties and keep on going, right? Just keep going. So finally there came a point in my life where I just could not ignore what was happening anymore, and that was the birth of my son in 1999. So the precipitating event for me, with all the bubble over, I guess, happened in 1999. After delivering my son, he stopped breathing in the NICU, and I had to be rushed into emergency surgery after losing 70% of my blood during childbirth. My uterus didn't contract, and I just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. I had a near-death experience in the hospital. I had to be resuscitated. It was very serious. I mean, I think my mom saw me the day after, and you like pretty much burst into tears. I didn't look like a healthy human. Anyway, I stayed in the hospital for over a week, during which time I was offered a blood transfusion, but my husband, who is a doctor, he was really nervous about Hep C, HIV, and he was like, you know what, you should just go home and just relax and heal, just heal naturally. And I ended up leaving the hospital with a personal care aide, and the understanding was she would be with me until my red blood cell count became normal again. And so I had this aide with me for 8 weeks, and at the end of 8 weeks, it was determined that my blood count was fine. So because my blood cells looked good under a slide, I apparently was fine. Well, I can tell you, I was not fine on like 1,000 levels. First of all, I'm sure I was like iron deficient. You know, I lost all this blood. So I didn't feel good. I had this new baby. New babies are difficult in the best of circumstances. But I was all by myself. I didn't have any help. But everyone was just like, you're fine, you know, this is great, just be happy you have this new baby. So I tried to be fine. Almost immediately, I started to have some pretty bad insomnia. I couldn't sleep. Everyone told me that I was anticipating like the baby waking up, you know, you're just anxious, and there's probably some truth to that. I mean, I'm sure I was like, you wait for the baby to cry or whatever. And I'm sure there was some of it, but I was not fine. And I really started to look to my husband for some support, and he had cut out. I mean, you know, he is a good person, but he definitely he put himself right back into his regular schedule. He went back to work, he left me by myself all day long, and I really needed some help. So anyway, after a year of chronic insomnia, I went to go see my primary care physician, and he told me that my symptoms were probably related to postpartum depression, and that there was this new amazing drug, and that I should probably try it. So he tried to have me try Prozac. Within 24 hours of starting Prozac, I started to have facial tics. And I mean, it's kind of funny. I used to say to people like, is my eye twitching? Can you tell my eye's twitching? And people would like look, and they were like, no, I don't see it. But I just felt this weird sensation in my body. I felt like my face was twitching. I felt energy. And so anyway, my doctor told me to come off of that medication, and then of course we're looking for the right cocktail. So he prescribes another one. We tried Zoloft, Celexa, Buspar, each one revving me up more than the last. And finally, I was so agitated. He was like, well, I'm gonna prescribe you a Klonopin, and it's gonna just, it's gonna calm you down. And it was like, oh, everything that he said was gonna happen. Like, I was able to sleep that night, I didn't feel agitated, I felt well rested for the first time in years. It felt like a miracle. I told people it was a miracle. So he basically said to me, I can't continue to write you for this, like I could just give you that one night pill, but I'm gonna send you to a psychiatrist. So I ended up going to see a psychiatrist who within it really is stunning, a 15-minute conversation with this psychiatrist, and he told me I had anxiety, depression, he told me I had bipolar disorder, and he said to me, I have 2 amazing drugs for you, and if you take them in combination, it's gonna be you're gonna be very good, everything's gonna be good. So he prescribed to me Lamictal and clonazepam. Lamictal for bipolar and clonazepam for insomnia, and apparently that was supposed to fix everything. He also told me that Klonopin was tried and true, that it was an old drug that had been around for decades, and he also told me he was writing me for a baby dose, which was 0.5 milligrams. So Dad, wake up back there. 0.5 milligrams, I know, 0.5 milligrams times 20 is how much? 10. That's the equivalent of Valium. I was taking 10 milligrams of Valium daily. He told me, and so as a person who never really liked to take anything more than aspirin, I did not like the idea of taking drugs, but this is years of insomnia, and I just felt like I needed to try what the doctor was telling me. And so I drove to the grocery store and filled my first prescription. It was a 30-day prescription for 0.5 milligrams of Klonopin, and I took it every day, and it was $5, by the way, I should say, because we had really good insurance, because, I was married to a doctor, and we had really good insurance, so $5, 30 days, and it seemed like, a miracle drug. And like I said, initially the Klonopin worked, I was able to sleep, I was able to function, I took it exactly as prescribed for 7 years. During this time though, I started to experience some very weird physical things I'd never experienced before. I got yeast infections, I got urinary tract infections, I started to feel this tightness in my throat, I started to just feel kind of generally unwell, but nobody ever said that it could have been the medication. In fact, when I talked to the psychiatrist who was prescribing, he encouraged me to take a little bit more if my anxiety spiked. He's like, well, it sounds like maybe you need a little bit more of the Klonopin. And he said that there was no way at such a low dose that the Klonopin could be hurting me, and it was harmless. Over the 7 years that I took this Klonopin, no one, not one person, ever suggested that I should discontinue the Klonopin. And even though the dose slowly started to inch up, so from 0.5, then I needed 0.75. After the 0.75, then I needed 1 to get the same effect. 1 went to 1.25, and you can see slowly over time that dose ticked up. I went to see GPs, dentists, all kinds of people. No one ever said, how long have you been taking that? And maybe you should rethink that. Never. No one said a word. In fact, everyone was so casual about my clonazepam use, I never questioned its safety, and I always trusted my doctors. I was married to one, and almost all of our friends were doctors because I was friends with his friends, and so I was surrounded by a circle of people who really believed in these medical cures. And I should also say, my sister-in-law liked to say things like, everybody's taking something, thus normalizing all of this. In 2011, okay, here's where things start to crumble. In 2011, I went to go see my psychiatrist, the person who was prescribing, and I was greeted by a note on the door, and the note basically said, Dr. So-and-so, I think I called him Dr. Cypher in the book, like Lucifer. It's not really his name, but you get to have fun with that in the book. It said that Dr. Cypher was no longer writing, he was no longer practicing, and so we need to go see our general practitioner. So I called my doctor and I was like, hey, can I come in? Because I gotta get this prescription filled. And he was like, come in immediately, come in right now. So I came in and he sat me down and he was like, so I just wanna be really straight with you. I cannot write for that drug. And I was like, why? And he said, because you should not have been taking that drug for 7 years. He said, you have an addiction problem. And I was like, an addiction problem? How is that possible? I take this exactly the way the doctor tells me. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't work like that. He's like, that's not the way that it works. He goes, you're gonna need an addiction specialist to get off of this. And I'm like, an addiction specialist? And he's like, yeah. So he gives me the name of a person, and I end up working with this woman. And so under her guidance, I started to, she basically said that I was gonna need to wean off of this drug, and we created a plan for a taper, and it was all written out and very clear. And her name is Patricia Halligan. She's an amazing doctor. I'm so grateful to have landed under her care. But the truth is, she didn't really warn me about what could happen. She was just like, yeah, we'll get you off of this. And I was excited to get off of it. And I didn't really know what weaning was, what it meant, what could happen. And I was not afraid on any level. Starting in October of 2012, and under the guidance of Dr. Halligan, I slowly started to taper down from the 2 milligrams of clonazepam down to 0.25 milligrams of clonazepam. And then because you can't really cut that any smaller reliably, like, I mean, you're just talking about crumbs, then she switched me over to the 5 milligrams of diazepam or Valium, and then I had to continue weaning down off of the 5 milligrams of Valium till I got down to 0.25 milligrams of Valium. And then she went to France. And while Dr. Halligan was in France, she didn't leave me any additional instructions. Now, to be fair to Dr. Halligan, because we've had this conversation recently, she was tired. She was wanting to go on vacation. She had people covering for her, and she was like, I'm going to France, you know? And so she had told me she was going to France. What she didn't tell me was that I wasn't done with my wean, with the taper. She really wanted me to continue down on what's called a water titration, which is to continue incrementally chunking off little bits, but you need the help of a compounding pharmacy. It's not something I could have done. I mean, some people do it by themselves by like mixing it in water, and it's like, if anyone knew me in school, like I was not a scientist and I was not a mathematician, so I was definitely not going to be undertaking that. But her plan for me was to continue to taper down. She didn't articulate that. The pad of paper ended at 0.2 milligrams of Valium. So I was like, I'm done! I'm done! I told my husband, I went out and bought a new dress, we went out for dinner to celebrate because I was done. The freaky thing about these drugs is they have a very long half-life. They stay inside your system for a pretty long time. So I thought I was pretty okay. About a week after stopping my last dose, I started to feel not okay. I felt unsteady. I went out to dinner with a friend of mine and I couldn't find my way back from the bathroom. Like I got lost on the way back from the bathroom. It freaks me out even when I say that. It's like, how could that have happened? I got back to the table, I couldn't remember her name. So I was having some cognitive issues. It was really scary. And, but I just sort of thought maybe I was coming down with something. Like I didn't connect it to the medication because I was done and I had tapered. I mean, it sounds weird not to have connected it, but I was like, I'm done, you know, and I didn't have anything immediately happen. I don't know, I had never done any independent research. I just trusted everything my doctor said. So 3 days later, I woke up and the world was not right. It felt like, if you've ever had an ocular migraine kind of thing, where you have like that kaleidoscope kind of thing, or just like weird, everything was too light, everything was too loud. I had to hold on, the floor felt like I was walking on a trampoline, you know, that like bouncy feeling, like on a boat, you have that like on the boat sensation. I had to hold on to a wall for support. I felt nauseous, I think I went and threw up, I think I thought I was pregnant. I mean, this is like, I didn't know what was happening to me. The cluster of symptoms that I endured after discontinuing the drug is a really horrible laundry list, but it's worth mentioning. I had headaches, nausea, muscle twitching, sensitivity to light, sound, and smell, digestive problems, inability to watch television, inability to speak over the telephone, depersonalization, which is like being in a bad trip, derealization, numbness, slurred and stuttered speech. I had tardive dyskinesia, which is involuntary body movements, and I just couldn't stop rocking, kind of like the kids with autism have. Remember when I used to lay on the floor and just like rock and rock? Oh my God, I was drooling. I had bladder spasms. I had auditory and visual hallucinations. I felt like I could hear doors slamming, trains coming and going. Oh my God, it's like hard to talk about it, you guys. I had poor emotional regulation. I was just crying. My tears were just coming out of my face. I had poor temperature regulation. I was sweating and then freezing. I had vertigo. I had something that I had breathlessness. Some people call that air hunger. I had extreme thirst and an inability to make decisions, intense dental and chest pain, and suicidal ideation. Any of these symptoms is hard enough to bear, but imagine having them all simultaneously for years. And no one believed me. No one believes you because it's invisible. If the physical symptoms were not hell enough, I also had a bunch of psychological symptoms, which frankly were scarier. I had fears that I had never had before. At my parents' house, I was afraid I was like terrified we were gonna have a fire. I was like afraid we were always gonna have a fire there and I'd be stuck in the house, I couldn't get out. I have always been a social person. I have no problem speaking in front of crowds, and I've always been pretty outgoing. Suddenly I was terrified. I was completely agoraphobic. I couldn't leave the house. I was isolating myself for months and months. I couldn't drive, and it was equally awful being a passenger. I developed hydrophobia. When I tried to take a shower, I felt like the water was touching my skin. I felt like I was being pelted with needles, so I just sort of stopped bathing for a time. Everything had a weird metallic taste. I accused my mom of trying to poison me. She tried to make me some really nice soup, and I was like, why does this taste like cigarettes? I had developed a fear of food and a weird anorexia because of this experience. I lost a lot of weight, and I even became dehydrated at one point. After a while, I ended up going to my parents' house in Syracuse. I called them. My dad they came to get me, brought me back to Syracuse. I was not in a good way, and they had a computer where I finally was able to get on the internet to like research like, what the hell is benzo side effects or benzo simply. I just was typing anything in, and all of a sudden I was shocked to find entire websites and chat rooms devoted to the thread on this topic about like benzo withdrawal. I was completely suicidal at one point, and I called the psychiatrist to ask what I should do because my doctor was out of town. And the physician on call said that he thought I should reinstate the medication, so start taking the drug again, or he said I should go to the emergency room if I thought I was going to hurt myself. And somehow in my head, and I still stand by this because this is what happens to people, I felt like if I was going to go somewhere that they were going to think, and I was going to tell them that I was having all these symptoms and that I had stopped taking this drug, I really felt like they were going to lock me up, possibly restrain me, and probably end up drugging me again, right? I would be polydrugged because I'm having hallucinations, I'm hearing things, I'm seeing things, and I know how it sounded, and so I was like, I am not going anywhere. And so I just thought to myself, I just have to hold on, and like eventually this has got to stop, right? Like any bad trip, it has to eventually stop. It's got to eventually end. And I figured I just had to hold on. It can't last forever, I figured. However, all the literature said that I would feel better in 3 months. So I was like, 3 months, okay. But the symptoms continued to worsen. And I remained homebound and pretty disabled for years, actually. In 2014, during this period of searching, I was in a very bad way, and I went to go get a massage at a place here in Rochester, in Syracuse, called Koinonia. Is that what it is? Koinonia. And my neighbor Gina was like, "Why don't you go get a massage? Maybe there's somebody there that can help you. They have all kinds of organic options." And so I went there, and I had this massage that wasn't. This woman, practitioner, tried to put things on my body, and I was like, "What are you doing? Why are your hands like sandpaper? And why are you hurting me?" And she's like, "It's just lavender." And I'm like, "This isn't working." So I went outside and I was crying and crying by the side of this building. My dad was gonna pick me up in an hour or something, and I basically had this thought where I was like, this is it. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. This is the end. And I started looking at the top of the building and thinking to myself, this is where it ends for me. My brain is scrambled. I'm gonna jump off of this building. And I was crying and I was thinking about my son and I'm of no use to anybody. And while I'm sitting by the side of the building, crying hysterically, this silhouette appears. And honestly, in my memory, it was she's in silhouette. So there was looked like feathers were going on over her. I was in a bad trip. And so, wow, look at this. And so I was in the middle of this bad moment, and this woman comes over and she's like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I am not okay on any level. I'm about to kill myself, sister. And she's like, what's going on? And I told her I was just come off of this drug and I wasn't feeling good. And there's a whole more bit to that story, but we'll just anyway, she's like, do you want to come home with me? And I'm like, yes. And I did not ask her name. I did not ask anything about her family. I was like, if this woman is gonna kill me, this is great, because I was just about to jump and I just hope she's fast. I just hope it was right around that time where that Jamalski guy had cut people up, and I was like, great, if she's gonna put me in her backyard, let's just make it snappy, sister. So I went with her, and while I was living with RENEE in her house, and I was gonna say, she literally picked me up off the street and brought me home, as Harry can attest to, her husband. And basically, while I was living in a MCLAIN house, RENEE taught me about eating organically, about juicing, about yoga, meditation, supplements. She taught me about the power of SRI, which is somato respiratory integration, which is a special kind of breath work, which I'm gonna make her talk a little bit about afterwards, because I don't even really understand why it works, but it does. It's incredible. And the other piece was that she just loved me through this. She was picked me up. I was a mess. How many people would do that? You see someone who is a mess and say, why don't you go home with me and live with my family? It was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing. During this time, I learned how to listen to my body, which quite frankly, I had not listened to my body in decades. Way back when I was raped in 1980s, people were like, just get your shit together and keep going. And I was not taking care of myself. I was working too hard. I was not listening to my body's signals, and I had been medicated, so I wasn't even feeling my body for a really long time. So I learned to listen to my body. I kept doing all the things that RENEE taught me to do. I tried to work with a whole bunch of other holistic practitioners. I had lots of massage, cranial sacral. I went out to Arizona and got some help at a rehab out there. And finally, in my third year, at 30 months off the Klonopin, I had 1 hour where for some reason, they call this a window. I had this window where I was like, I'm kind of okay. I'm actually kind of okay right now. It wasn't perfect, but I was had this dramatic reduction in symptomology, and I was like, I'm gonna be okay. Now, the symptoms came back. That's called a wave, and that's when they come back. But that 1 hour that I had, I'm telling you, that was life altering for me, because I figured if I could have 1 hour, it could happen again, and then maybe I could have 2 hours. And that's literally how I started to live my life, was well, hopefully I'm gonna have another one of those hours. In 2017, this is now 4 years after the injury, I started talking to other people and learned that there were tons of people going through the same situation. There was suddenly all these Facebook groups and chat rooms and all this, and so I was stunned to learn how many other people had been injured. There are tens of thousands of us, and our stories are uncannily similar. There are actually over 1,600 scientific articles that have been written about the dangers of benzodiazepines, and people like Sinead O'Connor and Stevie Nicks and Eminem, they've been talking about this since the 80s, and yet the message still seems to be muted. Just to fast forward, while I was homebound and disabled, I started to paint, and I think most of you know this about me here, that over a 3-year period, I made over 1,000 paintings. I've always been creative, but I wasn't ever painting like this. In fact, I had been thrown out of my homeroom from my art teacher, like homeroom teacher. Like, I didn't even take art in high school. And so I was always creative and artsy and like, you know, whatever, but I had not like this. I was having full-fledged like visualizations of artwork and like they needed to be painted. So that, quite literally, art saved my life. I had some kind of purpose and I would post them on Facebook and people would look at these things and be like, I like that, can I buy that? While I was healing, I started networking and making a new community. I started working with other artists and teaching classes and participating in festivals. Hi, Bill. And using my artwork as a way to facilitate conversations around the difficult truth around benzodiazepines and mood-altering drugs in general. Okay, so here's what I want you to know. Over the last 8 years, because it was 8 years on August 1st, I have learned a lot, and I'm just gonna be very bold and say that these psych meds are messing people up, plain and simple. When a person is anxious or depressed, it is an indicator that something in our bodies is out of alignment. Whether that's because of trauma or a physical injury or some underlying physical, like lifestyle situation that needs to be changed, the psych meds only mask the somatic symptoms and they do nothing to help you to address the real underlying core issue. And this is obviously a disaster because what you're doing is there's a problem and then you're keeping another problem, a secondary problem on top of the problem, which keeps us looking at the secondary problem and never ever reaching the main problem. In my view, all benzodiazepines do is keep people stuck where they are in a state of freeze, and that is what all psych meds are meant to do. That's why they're happy pills. They keep people complacent, they keep us stuck, and they keep people unmotivated and in some cases unable to make the real changes in their lives. And the worst thing is that people aren't even aware that they are in this state. People like to joke around about the zombie apocalypse. I'm convinced that the zombie apocalypse is real, that there are millions of numbed out people living among us and they have no idea what the drugs are doing to their brain chemistry. I wrote Psychiatrize, this book, for several reasons. I wanted to, first and foremost, I wanted to offer people who are in this situation some hope because there's no really great statistic on this, but a high percentage of people in benzo withdrawal end up committing suicide. Just imagine living like that for years and years. You know, if you have cancer, there are support groups. If you have MS, there's support groups. There's starting to be some support, but at that time when I was going through this, there was nothing. So I really wanted to offer some hope and let people know you can get through this. Second thing is I wanted people to understand that trauma produces somatic symptoms. That's just what trauma does. That's what PTSD is. So just like in your car, if your red light goes on in your car, now some people might ignore the red light, right? But like the red light means you have to do something in your car, you have a problem with your car. So I always say people take better care of their car and pay better attention to the signals in their cars and our own bodies. But these somatic symptoms like headaches, digestive unrest, all these things, these are our own internal warning systems. Warning, warning, something is out of whack, you know, you need to take some action. But over the last 50 years, these normal somatic experiences have been pathologized by Western medicine. And when you follow the money, it's very easy to see that drug companies are driving medical school education and encouraging doctors to prescribe more and more pharmaceuticals. Patients, unfortunately, have also bought into the idea that access to affordable drugs, like we have all these discussions about affordable drugs, that affordable drugs is what makes America better than other countries, and this messaging needs to be evaluated. And to be fair, I am not against medication. Like, I definitely think that there are things where you need to go to the doctor, you need to do that, but we are over-prescribing, clearly. I also really want people to reevaluate their own priorities and values and realize we're living in a society that encourages us to do more, consume more, be perfect, and do things fast. and also to numb all our negative feelings. Like somehow we're in this weird thing, this like pursuit of happiness that's part of our constitution, that people think that like happiness, continued happiness is sustainable. Like life, you know, we all have, into everyone's life a little rain must fall, and like we all are gonna have these things, and so the goal is to talk about these situations with other people when we're going through them, instead of feeling ashamed, embarrassed, or I don't know, ashamed or embarrassed. And finally, I want people in the mental health professions and also the medical community to understand that this is an iatrogenic injury, which means it's medically caused. And so people who have been benzo harmed are coming to them with severe injuries. It's a brain injury, just as much as if you had, people always ask me when I say I had a brain injury, they're like, oh, were you in a car accident? And this is a chemically caused concussion, severe brain injury. And it's severe, debilitating, and long lasting. And I just want people to understand that when people go to see the doctor, that they're in a terrible way when they're coming off of these psych meds. Not long ago, I actually had the opportunity to meet with my primary care physician, who's retired now, and talk to him about this. He was the first person who prescribed that little dose of clonazepam for me that had worked. And he told me that he had been taught in medical school that benzodiazepines were helpful with insomnia, as well as a host of other complaints, tics, restless leg syndrome, all kinds of things. And he totally tearfully, he was crying, because he was a personal friend of mine at that point, and he apologized to me and said he absolutely had no idea that what he was prescribing would cause me or anyone else harm. And so it's my intention to get this book into medical schools all over the country, because I want doctors to start approaching their prescription pads with a greater sense of caution. Just like oxycodone and many other drugs that doctors have prescribed, I think doctors prescribe them with the best of intentions, but they are being overprescribed and injuring people when they're given long-term, right? And my last thing is just that, the last thing I want you to know is that I believe, and RENEE has helped me to see this, that we are in the middle of a massive paradigm shift. For hundreds of years at this point, we have been taught that we need to put our faith in Western medical system, that the system is one of the great pillars of America, that doctors know more than the rest of us, and that we should actually be turning over our care to others who know better about what we need to do to stay healthy. And what is being revealed to us now all around us is that many of the great pillars of our culture are actually profoundly broken. So, and I'm talking our religious, educational, legal, political, economic, and medical, all profoundly broken. We're seeing it. We're going through some pretty big growing pains as a country, as a planet, and I just want to say we all have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because we're at the very beginning of this paradigm shift, and we have a lot of unlearning to do. The great artist, Frida Kahlo, once said, at the end of the day, we can all endure more than we think we can. And I know firsthand that she is right. We are all being called to wake up and feel our feelings, be present in our lives, to challenge these deeply embedded cultural assumptions, and to prepare for what is coming our way, because it's coming. That is all I have to say. So, thank you. That's all I have to say about that. Yeah. So Renee, will you come up and talk a little about SRI, just to explain, because frankly, I would like to understand it better. I mean, I know I do, but I don't.
You did it.
I did it. It's crazy.
You did it.
Let me dive.
I've been wanting to close this curtain the whole time.
You understand?
No guys see here.
I'm sitting there going, it's kind of shoulders and
Girls,
It's wobbly. You don't want that.
yeah, no. Well, I wanted to the whole time put this down for you too. But
Don't do
okay.
it.
She was easy to love. All of you would have taken her in your home too. I mean, yes, they would have. So, and you know, that was a familiar scene to us because my sister and my dad broke his leg in 10th grade and was addicted to prescription drugs from breaking his leg. Never graduated high school, and it wreaked havoc on our entire childhood. So we were used to my dad picking bugs off the wall, and so it was easy to go toward her because it was familiar to me, and to bring her home wasn't a big deal because I already do all the things already. You know, we eat clean, I meditate, I do yoga, and healing trauma is what I've been doing for 25 years. So, you know, the body, it is very, very simple, and the body tells a story. We just either don't listen to it or we don't know how. So for 25 years, I've been helping teach people in order to heal, you have to feel. And with a world that's so numb and doesn't feel, I have one person at a time making a difference on this planet. Although COVID hit, and I was like, wow, I thought I was waking up a lot of people for 25 years. We're still very asleep on the planet. But through my own, I had 3 diseases, and through that, you know, going to my own dark night of my soul of suffering, you learn a few things along the way. You know, you got to get yourself out of those places, and it is, no matter how much help you have along the way, ultimately you're the one that's doing the work. So RENEE I am her biggest cheerleader because that voice needs to be heard, because every single day, especially during COVID, you know, working on our sweet babies that are suicidal. I've done more suicide in the past 2 years than I have in 25 years. And the first thing they do is want to medicate these sweet babies. So I get them on my table, and, you know, they're anywhere from 8 to, you know, 20. And it's easy when you're 8 to bring all of your emotions to the surface and to get emotional. Although the moment, you know, it's easy to access the emotions, but the moment the emotions surface, that's what the medication is designed to do, is anytime you get anxious, the chemical is released, and then the person on my table that was crying then is like this. And it's so sad for me. It is sad. And I've been screaming from the rooftop for, you know, 25 years that, you know, God put 2 things on your body where you know you're alive. Your heart's beating and you're breathing. And it seems like we should pay more attention to those 2 things. And the breath is the connection to feeling. And I don't know why we're not taught that in 3rd grade. I don't know why we're not taught about the power of breath. It is the connection. So, you know, these SRI is these 12 levels of consciousness, and, you know, we all suffer. And the beautiful thing is, you know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so we're here having this human experience, and in being in human form, you get to feel. And again, it could be very simple. If it feels good, you go toward it. If it feels bad, you go away from it. But again, we're so numb, we don't have a compass there. So we suffer because we feel. Although every time that you go up a level of consciousness, like stage 2 is finding your rhythm. Who are you? And at a very young age, we are imprinted with belief systems of our parents. Money doesn't grow on trees. You know, brush everything under the carpet, don't talk about it. What will the neighbors think? So we're programmed with all of those belief systems. So once you move through suffering and you try to find your rhythm, you are, you know, repatterning the belief systems of, what do I really believe? Who am I really? So I tell everybody, every time you go, you know, and stage 3 is being stuck in a perspective. If you're stuck here, you're stuck in the body. And, you know, stage 4 is taking your power back, reclaiming who you are. I tell everybody, stage 3 is like being in a ditch, and stage 4 brings you up and out of the ditch, and they go hand in hand. But every time you go through these levels of consciousness, because we're human, you go back through the door of suffering. It's your greatest teacher, although we don't think that. And although somebody coming to me who has stage 4 cancer, that's really suffering. But as you get up in levels of consciousness, your suffering may be that you just lost your job. But that's the greatest thing that ever happened to you, but we don't trust that. We go down the rabbit hole, thinking that's the worst thing that ever happened to us. So what I help people realize is your curse is really your blessing, and it's just your perspective. So because we're human, we see everything in the eyes of suffering. So as you gain consciousness, like Renee, you take that curse and you make it your greatest blessing. And look what she's done, and look at the thousands of people she's changing lives. Why wouldn't I prop that up? Because now she's an extension of me and I have an ally. And together we are really, really powerful. So she was easy to love. My family was gracious. My husband is forever saying, your clients always become your friends. You have no boundaries.
Shut up, you give me socks.
I gave her little socks. So this, we opened the center because we are the other side of the equation. And often this is not told enough. So I find it interesting that the building was just available next to the Synergy Center, and Dr. Anderson, who has the other perspective. She is one of the doctors that teaches you about acupuncture and, polarity therapy and yoga and all that. So she's been blazing the trail for a while, and we just happen to be next door. And like I tell everybody, they walk in her door for Western medicine and they walk in our door for Eastern medicine, and how complementary we're right next to each other. So there's a couple other therapists here today that work here at the center, so anybody can ask answer any questions or give you a tour if you want. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'll be either of us, actually.
Yeah. The body tells the story. Just listen to it. And sensation is really powerful. Sensation is the doorway in. So whatever you feel, bring your breath there and go toward that. We're taught to go away from that. So everything that's suppressed, ignored, and shamed wreaks havoc on the body. Yeah. And like Renee, I like your image of, we just keep piling it until we hit the wall, and then that's where we make change. But it isn't until we suffer that we make that change. So right now, as these systems are falling that Renee said on the planet, this is the messy part. And it's supposed to get messy every time you go up a level of consciousness. And the systems have failed us across the board. Our healthcare systems failed us, our money systems failed us, our education system has failed us. Like, all of these systems need to fall so we can rebuild. And the power of the people, like, now is our time.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, with your suffering, for my teacher friends in the room, if your family system is part of the problem,
right?
If your family system, like, people are miserable in the house and there's fighting and they don't get along, then the kids feel that stuff, right? They feel that, and they come to school and they're acting out.
Yes.
Maybe they're not getting food, they're not eating or whatever, so they're acting out. But then the solution becomes, let's give them ADHD medication. Right. Well, that makes them behave,
right,
but we're not addressing the suffering of what's really happening. Right. So we get stuck at level 1.
Yeah. And
when you are taking meds, and this is something I did not say, but when you are taking meds, there's no chance of feeling. There's the disconnection, so you can't make the changes. You can't move forward.
I'm so glad you said that, because part of what we do here is and I cried plenty of tears because I didn't go to school and get a psychology degree, so I don't have pretty letters after my name. It isn't until now, on this time in my life, that I'm so happy, because I get to say shit that therapists can't say to parents, and I let it fly. And the 11-year-old isn't the person I need on the table, it's the parents. So, but I have to go through the 11-year-old to get to the parents. Hold that thought. Okay. And so now we go after the whole family, because it's a whole. And it's beautiful. We have families coming in and doing a breath class together. It's really beautiful, the changes we're making. You just said something, that I really wanted to piggyback off.
That you really can't feel your body when you're taking meds. You just can't even get the coping skills.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It was really, really
Go to
important.
Amy.
Okay.
No, you had mentioned something about working with children up to age 20, but do you?
I do both. Yeah. But during COVID, that was a majority. I did 8 to 16. A lot of that was suicidal. Oh, thank you. I just remembered. Thank you. Because during that time, what I say to people is, and I tell the parents this, if I'm not against medication too. It was designed to temporarily get you to lift your head and see clearly. It's not a long-term thing. But when people get a little bit of relief, especially parents, because they're not staying up all night, their kids not, they're drooling on themselves and they're not unruly. So, it works, but it doesn't work. Because what I say to parents is, when your child is suicidal, and, you know, for instance, this happened a couple weeks ago, I had an 18-year-old want to jump out a window. And the mom called me, and I asked the mom to leave the room and give me the phone to the girl on the windowsill. And I said, you have two voices in your head, one telling you to jump, and you haven't jumped yet. So that voice, I call it the God particle. You're able to not jump because you have that voice. The minute you medicate your child, that voice goes away.
It's suppressed, for sure.
And it's
your higher power, blocks
Yes.
your higher power.
so
Only the devil voice
yeah,
comes through.
totally. And I
Totally.
said, go ahead and medicate because the mom couldn't deal with it anymore. So she wanted to medicate. I said, go ahead, but lock your bedroom door because you medicate that and you have no idea which way it's going to come out. And she could possibly stab you in the night. Like that's, like the people that go into schools and do all the shooting, nobody ever asks them if they're on 2 or more different medication because that's part of the side effect. If you mix these 2 drugs together, there's a little voice in your head that says, go to the school and kill all the kids. Or if they take their life, nobody asks, are they on these 2 medications? Because the side effect is suicidal ideation. Nobody says that. Nobody talks about that.
Well, they say they had mental illness.
Yes, I'm so done with
Yeah,
that
so
whole-
done.
I can take, honestly, you guys, and I would love to be the teacher that teaches the teachers. However, I just signed up this lifetime to go into these really dark places and be the light in that. So I can take any trauma or any physical disease, any illness of somebody, and I can drill it down to something emotional that's happening in their life. And that emotion has festered and wreaked havoc on the body and turned into disease. That's what dis-ease is in the body. It's an emotion that's suppressed, ignored, and shamed, 99% of it. And I just 25 years of doing the hardest, you know, I've been in the bowels of this planet. I can drill it down to something emotional that's happened. You have throat cancer. What is it that you didn't speak your entire life? I can work. The hardest part about doing this is if the trauma is in the womb, there's no language. Or if it's 1 and under, there's no language. So it's completely sensational. So if somebody's 16 and they've been in years of therapy and they're not getting anywhere and their trauma is 1 and under when there's no language, therapy isn't going to access the core part of their trauma. They have to go do some kind of body work where you access the sensation, and the only way out is through.
And P.S. there are people who can do past life regression.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very powerful too to like realize that we aren't just us. We are our mothers, our mothers' mothers, and we impact our
14 generations. They did a study. You can Google this. They did a study where, you know, they created trauma in a lab rat. They sprayed rosehip oil and shot the lab rat. Sprayed rosehip oil and shot the lab rat. And then they impregnated and when the baby came out, they didn't shock it, but they sprayed rosehip oil. So, and the rat shook. So for 14 generations, they did that. So we know that we carry at least 14 generations of trauma in our body. So, and we were brought up Catholic. We say that we're the good Catholic girls gone bad.
Totally.
But, so we, you know, there's just this life. You don't talk about it. And that is such limited thinking and we thought that. And it wasn't until we started having experiences on our table with people with trauma. Like a lady came to me for weight loss. She was getting really heavy and she tried everything and she thought maybe it was emotional. So weight is weight, and what was the weight? So she came to me for that, and on my table she was drowning. Like literally, if you were watching her on my table, she was drowning. Ripped my shirt off me, she was drowning. And I didn't know what was happening, other than she was clearly drowning, but she wasn't drowning. So I just kept walking her through the process, and she had this huge shift of, you know, she had a memory. And I used to say to people, you know, your trauma gets stored in your cellular memory. And, you know, one of the ways to access that is through breath. So from the womb till now, whatever you stored in your cells, I don't say that anymore because my experience isn't that. Because it could be from a previous life, but we haven't even scratched the surface on that yet. We are so intelligent, our bodies are so intelligent. Again, we haven't even scratched the surface on it. We can heal ourselves. We just don't have any idea how to do that. And I've healed from 3 diseases, so I learned a few things along the way. So I do know how to heal. And so you, and
For sure.
and many others. Yeah, any other questions for Renee? Or Renee? Or Renee? So thank you.